Okay, good morning and welcome to day 2 of the Wider Local Studies seminar. This seminar brings together anyone with an interest in or working in local studies. My name is Nicole Hilda and I'm joining you today from the Port Phillip Heritage Centre in South Melbourne. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country across the many lands we're joining from today. I'm on Bunurong country here in Melbourne. I acknowledge the traditional owners and their unceded connection to land, water, and community. I deeply value their wisdom and skill in storytelling and preservation as custodians of the world's oldest continuous living culture. I pay my respects to elders past and present. If you'd like to, please feel free to pop into the chat and share where you're joining us from this morning. Our first session today is on oral history, and we've got 4 brilliant speakers lined up, each offering different perspectives on collecting and working with oral histories. This session will take us through to 12:50 Eastern Standard Time, where we'll break for half an hour. We will be keeping an eye on the chat throughout the session, so don't feel like you have to wait until the end to ask questions. If something comes up, please pop it into the chat and we'll do our best to include it in the conversation. Let's get started. Our first speaker is Maria Savidis from the State Library of New South Wales and Oral History New South Wales. Maria is going to be talking on dealing with legacy oral history and other items where there's no paperwork or provenance, something that I'm sure is a familiar conundrum to a lot of us. So welcome, Maria. We're really thrilled you could join us today.
Thank you, Nicole. Good morning, everyone. My name is Maria. I'm from the State Library. As Nicole mentioned, I'm a specialist librarian here and I focus mainly on collecting oral histories. I'm also president of Oral History New South Wales and the network lead of NASLA's Oral History Network. So absolute oral history tragic, favorite thing in the world. I am speaking to you from unceded Gadigal land, and this is a place with millennia-old tradition of oral knowledge sharing, and it's very much a legacy I deeply respect and one that continually shapes my thinking, and I do want to pay my respect to elders past and present. So it is really that incredible legacy of this continuing oral tradition that is always front of mind with us as we work, especially in acquiring oral histories for the library. And it's particularly present when I reflect on the literal thousands of hours of legacy oral history recordings that we have worked very hard over the last 10 years to digitize and safeguard through one of our major preservation and digitization projects. But today I wanted to share with you some strategies that we've had to kind of think of to put in place in order to try and responsibly make these oral history collections more accessible. And I am focusing on legacy oral history recordings, particularly because often the paperwork for these recordings is missing or incomplete or not very clear, which does limit what we can do in terms of access ethically. As you do know, oral history is completely underpinned by ethics, so it is something we have to treat very carefully. I think in the program you should have received a link to the document that I'm going to be referring to today. It is the NASLA Procedural Guidelines for Risk Assessment in Oral History Recordings, and I really wanted to walk you through the steps of what it covers, how it works, and how you might apply it in your own library collection context. Firstly, why does this even matter? Why do we need guidelines like this? A lot of us are custodians of these remarkable oral history collections. They're interviews with everyday people and beyond, but often we're unsure because of this paperwork what we can actually do with them. And this issue became very, very clear to us through regular meetings of NASLA's Oral History Network. For those of you that don't know, NASLA is the National State Libraries Association in Australasia, and that is the state and territory libraries in Australia and New Zealand. There are 10 member libraries, and we meet regularly throughout the year and just talk to each other about advice on what we're collecting or any issues that we're coming across or problem solving in the realm of oral history. And it is a very, very useful way to touch base and try and help each other through the problems and triumphs that we're all facing. And this is where the issue of legacy recordings and permissions really came through. Because we're missing this paperwork, we don't always know how to treat these recordings. So we wanted to come up with a set of guidelines that we could apply, that would apply widely, that are very logical and responsible in order to mitigate risk for our organisations, but most importantly for the people whose stories are recorded, and just sort of provide almost like a checklist of things to work through so that we could comfortably come to a decision on maybe if something is appropriate to put online or not. I know there's sometimes the assumption that if something is digitized, you can put it online or it's easily accessible, but that's not always the case, and certainly not with oral history. But we do, obviously, we're a collecting institution and we want to share as much of our material as possible with as many people as possible, but we obviously have to balance that with responsibilities to the interviewee and the people on the recording. So what is covered in these guidelines? To clarify, they only really talk about legacy oral history recordings. There's a definition of what we consider legacy in those guidelines. And they don't cover things like radio broadcasts, commercial music, or any other third-party copyrighted material. So that is absolutely separate. And importantly, they're not legal instructions. They're practical tools to assess risk based on industry best practice, and they're there to support us, not scare us. And we've laid out these 7 steps in the order of how you should actually work through them when checking your recordings for risk. So the first step, which is crucial but maybe the easiest, if you can get this, you can go past go and you're kind of home free. Can you identify the rights holders or the interviewee? If you can, fantastic. You probably just need to get them to sign an up-to-date rights permission form from your library, and then you should hopefully be all set, because it is their story and they get to set out their permission and access and their wishes on how they want you to manage that story on their behalf. If you cannot get in touch with the interviewee, you might be dealing with an orphan work. Again, NASLA has put up a definition of what constitutes an orphan work, and we do recommend doing what we call a reasonably diligent search. And there's a position statement that describes what a reasonably diligent search is and what that looks like. If that fails, then you continue through the rest of these steps. The second part to consider is if you are dealing with recordings involving Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people, in which case we refer you to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Library Information and Resource Network, and also NASLA's own Indigenous cultural and intellectual property statement. And these resources are there to provide essential guidance to ensure cultural safety, respect, and appropriate community consultation. So sometimes, even if the rights seem very clear on paper, we do still have to ask, is it culturally appropriate to make this recording accessible, especially when you're putting it online? Step 3, we're talking about, at this very early stage, doing a very quick overview assessment of the content. So before you dive into hours and hours and listening to every single second, you can usually just get a quick idea of what it entails. That includes if there's any transcripts, you can skim through those, any content summaries, any correspondence, any documentation about the project or the interview. The goal here is to get a feel for the content and is it likely to be low risk or raise any red flags. And if it does seem fairly straightforward and uncontroversial, you might only need to sample the recording rather than listen to every single minute of it. Step 4, this is really where you get into the meat of it. Does it contain any sensitive content? And here we're talking about things like private addresses, medical details, stories that involve trauma or grief or abuse, comments about other people who are still alive, identifiable third parties, criminal accusations, defamation, comments about vulnerable people, cultural sensitivities. These are kind of, there's a long list, but they're kind of the more obvious ones that you want to be looking out for. And just because the recording might contain some of these things doesn't mean it has to be locked away, but we do need to tread carefully. And that could be something like considering some parts being redacted. Or with the passing of time, you might find that some of the content is already public knowledge, especially when it comes to maybe court cases or allegations or something that maybe was sensitive information when it was recorded but is now clearly documented and everyone knows about it. And this is really where a bit of judgment and experience and caution really come into play. But on the last page of the procedural guidelines, we've got a risk table that breaks down the sort of 3 low, medium, and high risk categories and what you might expect to find in them, and also what level of access you might want to give or think about. So this kind of triaging really helps you with prioritizing the collections for review, because also keep in mind it can be quite resource intensive. If you're dealing with one interview, fine, but if you're dealing with a project that has 50 interviews and you're looking to make the whole thing open access or put it online, it's obviously going to take you a lot longer to work through that content. I touched on redaction a little bit earlier, and this is again something you might consider in terms of a recording. And it's important to understand we're not talking about censorship, but we're talking about protecting people's privacy and dignity. So that could be as simple as bleeping out someone's name or a street address, literally seconds of audio. And this can really clear the way for the rest of the interview to actually be accessible. But the key here is to document the redaction process and ensure everything is done in a very clear and open and respectful manner. And also keep in mind, redaction is just one option. It might be more appropriate to embargo or restrict access to only on-site listening only. There's a few different alternatives you can do to restrict access. Step 6, and this applies to any format really, is to document everything. This is kind of what led us here in the first place, that lack of documentation. And that includes, while you're doing the risk assessment, please do document how you searched for the rights holders. That's going to come in handy with your diligent searching. What you found in the recording, any decisions that you made about redacting or suppressing or limiting access, who has signed off on these decisions and what exactly have they signed off on, any takedown requests that might come later. So really this clear paper trail isn't just good practice, it's going to help your future self, the future organization, and anyone else that might pick this up down the track and want to access the interview or the recording. The last step is a takedown request. This applies to most libraries. Most libraries have it on their website, and certainly NASLA has a takedown request procedure. And occasionally someone might ask for a recording to be taken down or restricted. This could be a family member, this could be the interviewee themselves. The procedure is really there to assess each case fairly and sensitively, rather than just taking it offline without interrogating why. And sometimes the removal is completely warranted, and other times a bit more context or clarification can actually help resolve the issue. Either way, the thread here is to be really thoughtful about every step rather than reactive. And if you do all these things correctly, you shouldn't have to really go back and do any of this work again. You've thoroughly assessed it and made reasonable decisions and documented everything. In a nutshell, these guidelines were really created to help give us a solid and consistent process for making these decisions about access, and they help us balance the value of public access with the need for respect and safety and care. And they do encourage transparency both in our decisions and our documentation. They also remind us that context does matter. Not everything sensitive will be off limits forever, but it just might not belong online right now. I wanted to leave some time for questions, but I'll end with the final thought and something that I think about every single day. And I know you're thinking about too, because you're in this session. Oral history is incredibly powerful. It's human, it's emotional, it is often deeply personal. And that is why this work matters, because they're not files or recordings. These are people's voices and memories, and they're pieces of our shared cultural history. And by taking careful, respectful approach to this access, we make sure these voices can be heard safely and ethically. That's a very, very quick tour through the procedural guidelines. They took quite a bit of time to write, and we liaised with all of the state and territory libraries in Australia and New Zealand. I also spoke to colleagues at Columbia University and the British Library, because every collecting institution with a large amount of oral histories has this problem. We're all in the same boat, and it's quite heartening to hear that we all pretty much agree these are the steps that we need to do carefully to work through a collection in order to make the right decision, hopefully. I'll stop talking, but happy to take any questions or hear your comments or hear about what you're doing in terms of risk assessment in your collections.
Okay, so thank you, Maria. I think it's an incredibly valuable tool to highlight for library staff. I think there's always that tension between protecting people's privacy and being ethical as librarians, and also trying to make information accessible. So it's certainly given me a lot of confidence to proceed, knowing that I can follow the steps outlined in this document. I think I know that a lot of discussions I've had, library staff have been particularly cautious of moving forward with interviews that occurred before there was widespread knowledge of the internet. But I think following these steps, we can still kind of make those accessible in an ethical way. Joe Cooper has asked, do you have any advice on the risk adverse approach of libraries in this space?
I think libraries can be pretty conservative anyways, but I actually think you have to be very careful with oral histories, because they're not our stories. The story belongs to the interviewee. It is their life story. We happen to have the recording, but that doesn't mean we do whatever we want with it. And that's why that rights agreement form, or the rights permission, or whatever you want to call it, is so important, because it's the space where the interviewee sets out their wishes about how they want their interview to be used. But it's also a place where the interviewee can hand over copyright to the institution and say, yep, I give it to you, that's fine, you can do whatever you like, or you can do whatever you like according to these parameters that I've set. I think some people might want to just put stuff online and see what sticks, but that makes me very, very uncomfortable. So I think if you lead ethically and you think about the humans that you're affecting, that's a pretty good way to steer your decision making, I think.
Um, got a question as well from Farah, who asks, how long does it take you to assess an interview where all the details are known versus where some of the details of the interviewee are not known?
If you're dealing with a legacy recording and you are in contact with the interviewee, that's the best case scenario. It means you can ask them directly, what do you want us to do with your interview? Do you want to hear it again? Has it been some time? Do you
Mm,
want to have a listen and think about what you're comfortable with? How long it takes you to work through an interview is how long is a piece of string? Is it an interview that is fairly uncontroversial? Is it one interview? Is it 50 interviews? It really depends. And what other documentation might you have? Do you have a transcript? That's a really easy way to
mm,
get across a lot of the content very quickly. You can sort of
mm,
skim it and see if anything sort of jump out at you that you might need to go in and listen to a little bit more carefully. It's not a equation, and I think I mentioned it can be very resource intensive depending on what you're dealing with. 1 hour and a half interview won't take as long as 20 interviews, maybe where the sound is not very good quality either, and you can't quite make out what they're saying in parts. It's all like oral history, up in the air and very grey. The entire thing can be very, very grey.
mm. I wonder if you can reflect on this statement by Tonya, who says, I think for many of us with restricted resources, which is everyone, the best first approach might be to catalogue each interview, but to make it available on site only in the first instance, and hopefully with time do a fuller risk assessment for adding online access.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And generally in libraries, you can provide access to most things that aren't obviously restricted on site for private research and study. That's not the same as putting it online, which is just next level and opens you up to a whole raft of
Mm,
other considerations. But certainly,
mm,
access on site to an individual for private research and study, where you might just be taking notes, you're not reproducing it and reprinting it somewhere else, is often how most of us provide access to every format that we actually do collect. And that
mm,
again is in the absence of any known permissions or restrictions.
mm.
And I think libraries do that really well.
Comment from Ellen Forsyth. It makes it clear that libraries need excellent current documentation for all new oral history recordings. I think absolutely. And the
Yeah, so
actual
true.
interview is a very small part of the process.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you have any advice on where library staff, how they should store the accompanying documentation, and how important do you think it is to have a transcript of an interview?
Um, Look, a transcript can help with accessibility in the first instance. It can help researchers get across the material quickly, give them a sense of is this something they might want to spend more time with. It's not a
Mhm.
replacement for the recording, and I don't think it ever can be. It just sort of gives you an indication of the words that are spoken, but we know with the voice there is so much more that goes into a recording, and that isn't captured in writing on
Mm.
a transcript. Um, what was the first part of the question?
Oh, s storing,
Oh,
looking
storing
after
the,
documentation.
yeah,
Yeah.
it depends on what your um, information management system is really. We are all electronic, so we store our files are electronic. Anything pertaining to new acquisitions is all stored together, and that includes the rights permission and any other correspondence or documentation that went into acquiring it, the acquisition report, it all lives together. So it just depends on your particular institution and how you manage your information. Yeah, but keep it very, very close by and clear and obviously linked so that people know that this permission form belongs with this interview or pertains to this project, so that they don't get separated intellectually, even if you do have to store them physically somewhere else. Yeah.
Yeah. Sally has asked a very practical question. Why not? Good on you. Well, we've got Maria here. She says, we have a collection where all interviewees have since died. Do you have any advice on getting permission from relatives?
If they've died, it really just depends on what the context is. And often this is a tricky one because unless they've left in their will that copyright of their oral history recording is transferred to a particular family member, that's very hard to prove if there's an actual copyright owner. Most people don't really put that in their will, and it's not necessarily an automatic thing. Again, this is something you might want to follow up with the Copyright Council if there's any particular concern. We've had, but I've heard of instances in the past where family members attempting to take down recordings of a family member where they've actually signed a permission form and given their permission, in which case it's not their story and that was the wishes of the interviewee. And also they're not implicated in what the content is. They're not discussed as third parties in the interview. So there's all these very, very delicate considerations to keep in mind. It's like a lot of other things too, a lot of other materials and manuscript and archive collections. The family isn't always automatically the owner of the material because their loved one has passed away.
I guess, like Sally, you might want to say, were you thinking also not just from a copyright perspective, but you feel like morally or ethically to reach out to the family is the best thing to do? I'm not sure.
Again,
Yeah.
what's the content of the
Yeah.
interview? Is the family discussed? Is it going to affect them personally? If it just happens to be an interview that their family member conducted and they're not really involved in any way and they're not discussed in the interview and it has no emotional impact on them because of what is discussed, you really have to look at why that might be.
Yep. Okay, and Jen has asked a question. Do you have any advice on the use of online transcription tools, given the concerns regarding privacy of data with some programs?
Yeah, that's a big one. And that's for all of us really. Anytime you use any online or AI generative software, it opens you up to collecting the information that you're sharing. It can be a really quick and easy way to create summaries. And it's something we're discussing a lot. And again, we're not quite sure because it's something we're all concerned with and we're watching very carefully with interest, but you need to balance out the pros and cons.
Yeah.
And maybe it's appropriate for some content and not others.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is really case by case. Every single interview, every single person is completely different, and it is not one size fits all, which is why they take time and it is quite resource intensive. But it's because when you're behaving ethically, I guess nothing is easy or quick, but it is the right thing to do.
Yeah. And on that note, that's a very good note to end with. Thank you so much, Maria. I think it was super valuable for you to go through with us so calmly and professionally the steps that we should be taking. I think the NASLA website is worth checking out. There's a lot of resources on there, not just on oral histories, but a lot of useful resources for us. So thank you, Maria. Please stick around if you have time.
I will. I'll be here, so ask stuff in the
Amazing.
chat. I'm looking forward to Christopher's
Great.
presentation. So I'll be around. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Christopher Cheng, who works as an oral historian with the National Library of Australia and the State Library of New South Wales. He's also a member of our wider local studies organising committee. Dr. Cheng's talk is called Let's Guard the Candlelight, Unsilencing Our Multilingual Past Through Oral History. Thank you, Chris. And you'll just need to unmute yourself as well. Just letting you know it's in presenter's view, so we can see your notes as well.
See what I can do.
If you go into full display, there's a display option. Yeah. If you go into slideshow, there's an option on the screen that says display settings. It's up the top above your slide. And that usually,
yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah.
I want to begin with something simple, something small, but something that holds a lot of memory, a lot of meaning. I'm talking about the way we speak. The words we use, the words that come out without thinking. Sometimes they're in English, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they slip between both. They don't always follow the rules. They just feel right. And that's where I want to start today, because this is not about language. It's about remembering. It's about telling a story, and how we tell it matters just as much as the story itself. This is my manifesto for multilingual oral history. Before I get too far, let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Christopher Cheng, or in Cantonese, Jiang A. Chiu. I'm not a librarian. I don't know if I'm even a historian. I studied anthropology, then transnational migrant heritage. These days, I work in oral history, where the archive stops, active listening starts. I've been doing interviews for 17 years now. I started in Hong Kong, almost entirely in Cantonese. Here in Australia, I mostly talk to Chinese-speaking migrants and their kids who grew up speaking English. So far, I've worked on 35 oral histories as an interviewer, translator, and transcriber for the National Library and New South Wales State Library. That adds up to about 120 hours of recorded interviews. The same as driving Sydney to Melbourne and back 8 times. Let me take you back. Not to the beginning, but to a moment. Last year, I sat with an elderly gentleman. He'd come to Australia decades ago. Typically, he worked long, hard hours, said little. His son had reached out. He wanted to record his dad's story. Wanted to keep something before time's up. So we started. And then, halfway through the first interview, the son turned to me. Looking confused, he said, "I don't know what Dad's saying." And that moment struck me because they were family. Same house, same food, same blood. But the words, the languages they knew, it was as if they were speaking in Greek or gibberish, when actually one spoke fluently in Cantonese, another in English. Sometimes I think of it like oil and water. You shake it, you try to mix it, it looks close, it looks like it might blend. But it doesn't, not really. And our family stories, they're like candlelight. They're warm, they comfort, but they're also fragile. And if no one watches the flame, if no one guards it, it could vanish in a single gust, or worse, burn out while we're busy scrolling on our phones. And then, when it goes out, what are we left with? No fire, no warmth, not the story, just melted candle wax. That's what happens when languages disappear. That's what happens when no one listens. Because words carry the weight of our past and shape the fate of our future. In case you want to copy that down, let me say it again. Words carry the weight of our past and shape the fate of our future. But it doesn't have to stay like that. We can listen, we can record, we can collect. Oral history is one way we can carry things forward. We carry language, we carry accents, we carry memories wrapped up in sound, in rhythm, in tone. And just imagine if every town, every school, every community center, every library helped hold on to these stories, not just as paper files, not just in boxes, but as a spoken audio record. Then imagine you're on a long drive somewhere through the country and you press play and your grandma's voice fills the car. She's telling a story. She's laughing at something. She says a phrase only she would say. And in that moment, she's there again, sitting right next to you, traveling with you. That's the power of recording. That's the gift of memory. It tells us where we've been and it helps us figure out where we're going. So, how do we collect miles of memory? We start by listening, not just to the words, but to how they're spoken. Because being plurilingual is not just about speaking more than one language, it's about dancing between languages. It's about switching mid-sentence. And that's not a mistake or being lazy. It's about using a Cantonese word because English just won't do. That's what people do. That's what migrant families do day in, day out. That's our linguistic repertoire. That's our identity. I say this as I remember Ariel Chan, a linguist at Stanford, telling me that code switching is really common among Cantonese immigrant families, but surprisingly rare in the records. Proper recordings, she said, would be so valuable because, in the end, words carry the weight of our past and shape the fate of our future. As plurilingual oral historians, I think we're like moisturizers. We smooth out the cracks. We help generations understand each other. We're the in-between, between families and institutions, between communities and collections. And when we record, we don't just get names. Wow, names are a start. A photo is even better. But the story brings us much closer together. A voice on record, however, lives on forever. In Australia, the Italians and the Italian migration, a 1983 book, Janice Wilton and Santina Rizzo wrote on page 54, oral history tells the story in their own words, in their own way, using a tape recorder instead of a typewriter. And I like to think of my digital recorder like a silent hunter. It waits, it listens, it doesn't interrupt. It catches things, small things, important things, before they disappear. But why do we listen so attentively? Why? Because our culture is salvaged in language. Not just in the words, but in the way the words are used. If we lose the language, we lose the nuance. We lose the playfulness. We lose the jokes. We lose the little things, the silences, the rhythms, the stumbles, the mispronounced words. And when we record only in one language and translate everything into English, we leave things out. We lose the flavor. We lose feeling. So, to me, multilingual oral history is not just about sound. It's about unsilencing our multilingual past. It's about justice. It's about healing. It's about lifting up what was once pushed down. Let me end with a personal story. My grandma, she lived between Australia and China. 2 countries, 2 worlds, 2 ways of speaking. To an English-only speaker, she may be quiet, even distant. She didn't have thousands of words in English, not even hundreds. But in China, her grandchildren there saw her as an Australian. And guess what? She was the one teaching them English. She told them in Cantonese, "Fan" means rice. Not the bag stuff, but cooked rice. The stuff that breathes steam and smells just like home. She probably learnt it from sitting around my dad's Chinese restaurant in Cairns. Watching, listening, picking it up. And in that one word, it carried a world of movement, a world of memory, a world of mixing. So, my manifesto for multilingual oral history. Let's value non-English expressions. Let's preserve code switching, like slipping between Cantonese and English as real, legitimate, expressive speech, not as a glitch. Let's remember our culture lives on in the words people choose, in the way people speak, not just in what they say. Now, you may be wondering, what small steps can a local library like yours take? Maybe you can start by creating a listening station. Let people hear. real speech in the library. Or simply ask yourself, as Ellen Forsyth strategically reminded us yesterday about deliberate collecting, whose voices aren't here yet? Let's record those voices. Let's guard the candlelight. Let's carry those memories forward so they can travel with us. Finish this line for me. Because words carry the weight of the past. You're right. Words carry the weight of our past and shape the fate of our futures.
Thank you, Christopher. I think that was just a really, really beautiful reminder of the need for libraries to think about ways to include multilingual languages when we're collecting oral histories. I'm wondering, Chris, if we could just explore this concept of code switching. Could you give us a couple of more examples of that and why it's valuable?
Two things come to mind. This is particularly prevalent in migrant context, especially when migrants come to Australia. They pick up new words, maybe place names, maybe they meet people and they know them by their English name rather than the Chinese name. But so suddenly when they're talking about something, they switch and you'll hear them say an English word. Sometimes they're pronounced correctly, sometimes they're a bit mispronounced. So as an oral historian, I'm scratching my head trying to understand what they're saying at times. But sometimes it's quite interesting when they're speaking in Cantonese the whole time, and then they jump to say something that their son or daughter had told them. And that phrase or that sentence is in English. And you're like, whoa, they speak English. So it's something that's quite special in capturing migrants' experience in a new country. And the same goes with the children. When they're talking about their grandparents or their parents, they quote somebody, some of the lessons or some of the words that they hear their elders say.
Thank you. I think I could reflect on that for a long time. I did also really value that idea of having a listening station at libraries. There's a lot of comments in the chat just thanking you for sharing the story. And yeah, I guess particularly that thinking of having a long country drive and suddenly hearing the voice of your grandmother, like, yeah, that would be so powerful. I think it really captured the the power and the cadence of oral history and what it can contribute to storytelling. That was so beautiful, Chris. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's unfortunately though, or fortunately as well, it's time to move on to our next speaker. I'd love to welcome Dr. Anissa Puri from the Australian National University team of Language Data Commons of Australia. This project is called Identifying Precarious Victorian Oral History Collections, and it aims to identify and create a list of precarious oral history collections in Victoria that are held outside of major institutions. So glad you can join us today, Anissa. I'm really excited about this project. I filled in the survey the other day, so it's great to share it with the rest of Australia.
Thanks so much, Nicole. I'll just pull up my slides quickly. How does that look on your end?
Perfect.
Excellent. Well, hi everyone, and thanks so much for the invite to join this panel and event. I spoke with the Victorian Local Studies Special Interest Group a couple of weeks ago, which was terrific, and it's really great to be here connecting with colleagues working in local studies and local library contexts from across the country, and lovely too to be following on from Maria and Chris's wonderful presentations. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the unceded lands of the Yalukit Willam of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, where I live and work. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any First Nations people here today. I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and I acknowledge the long continuing history of First Nations storytelling and the rich scholarship by First Nations oral historians in and beyond this continent that settler oral historians like myself have much to learn from. By way of background, I'm a historian who specializes in oral history, and I've been working with oral history in different capacities for the last 15 years. So like Maria, a bit of an oral history tragic. I work as a research project manager at the Language Data Commons of Australia, known as LDACA, at the Australian National University, but I am, however, based in Melbourne. LDACA is a large national research infrastructure project with multifaceted aims, including increasing the findability of underused language collections and helping to secure at-risk collections. And these aims are aligned with what's important to oral historians and to those who care for oral history collections. My role at LDACA has involved conceiving of, developing, and managing a new oral history-focused project. And as Nicole mentioned, I'm going to speak to you about that project today, including discussing our aims and methods. The project I'll speak about today is a Victorian-focused initiative that we're thinking of as a pilot project. If this pilot is successful, we aim to hopefully expand the scope so that this can become a multi-year project that extends beyond Victoria. We may potentially expand to some other states or territories, or release a methodological toolkit so people in other places can undertake this work themselves. I'm just trying to move on to the next slide here. There we go. The Identifying Precarious Victorian Oral History Collections project is a Victorian project that aims to identify and create a public list of precarious oral history collections held outside of major national and state cultural institutions. We know that there are countless collections out there that are at risk of not surviving. Such collections are held by community projects and groups, current and retired academics, local historical societies, some GLAM institutions, including local libraries and local museums, historical consultancies, schools, businesses, and many others. Many collections are precarious because they aren't supported with appropriate long-term preservation. They might not have the ongoing resources to be updated when digital technologies and standards and platforms change in future decades. Or they might not have the ongoing resources to indefinitely manage interview access conditions into the future. Many individuals, communities, and organizations have invested time, care, skills, and effort into creating rich oral history collections in Victoria over the last several decades. And we know that these collections feature everyday people's stories, form part of our cultural heritage, and can inform and transform our understandings of Australian history and Australian society. So we aim to document information about as many precarious oral history collections in Victoria as possible. Collection holders can provide details about their collection via an online form on our website. And we're also happy to post out a physical form or complete the form on someone's behalf via a phone call if people prefer either of those options. Now, collections need to be currently located in the state of Victoria, but they don't need to relate to Victoria or have been conducted in Victoria to be eligible. Our project website and flyer will help people determine if we see their collection as precarious. But essentially, any oral history collection that isn't preserved in a national or state cultural institution that has the technical capacity and legal responsibility to future-proof recordings and indefinitely manage access conditions is eligible to be considered as precarious. I usually say to people, ask yourself if you're confident that your collection will be safe in 10, 20, or 50 years. And if you're not confident, your collection is eligible, so please consider filling in the form. We're interested in understanding things like when a collection was created, who created it, why it was created, and what broad topics the collection is about. We're interested in learning what physical or digital formats collections might be in. Are the interviews held on reel-to-reel tapes, cassette tapes, CDs, or on MP3 files, for instance? Are they audio-only interviews, or does the collection include audio-visual recordings? We're also interested in things like whether interviewees signed consent forms, what languages the collection was recorded in, how many interviews are in the collection, and whether there are existing transcripts. Most questions in the form are optional, so it's okay if people don't have much information about the collection. We want to hear from people regardless of the amount that they know about the collection. Importantly, collections don't need to be publicly accessible or available for use for collection holders to fill in this form. And the form doesn't ask for any details about individual interviews or sensitivities within interviews. We've created a guide with a glossary that offers guidance on how to complete the form, but we've also worked hard to make the form as simple and user-friendly as possible. The information we gather about these precarious collections will be made available in an online public database and will be included in the project report we'll publish upon the project's conclusion at the end of this year. The information we gather will also be shared with relevant major national and state cultural institutions who may be interested in our findings. This project will offer a one-off snapshot of the state of precarious Victorian oral history collections. It'll increase the visibility of the existence of these precarious collections, and it'll also become a foundational resource for any future work advocating for support, preservation, and appropriate use of precarious collections. The fact that this information that we learn will be made publicly available means that this resource will be available for anyone to build on in the future. The project's list and report will add more specificity to the discussion about precarious oral history collections, and we'll gain a better understanding of exactly how much is out there and the state that these collections are in. I'm supported by a couple of great colleagues at ANU. Research Officer Jen Rose is focusing on the project's outreach and promotions, and Catherine Travis provides advice on the project. The project also has a wonderful advisory committee of oral history experts, and I'm working closely with the National Library, the State Library of Victoria, Oral History Victoria, Oral History Australia, and community organisations. Here's a quick overview of our project stages. I began with a consultation period. I met with people working with oral history in several different organisations, as you can see on the screen, and I took on their feedback and ideas as I refined the project's approach. I brought together the advisory committee that I just mentioned, contacted other groups who I thought would be interested in learning about this project to inform them about it, and researched other projects that have attempted similar work. Project design and development was the next stage, which involved designing our own internal systems to run this project, developing our project website and other documentation, and most importantly, developing our project form, which went through several iterations. We also tested a draft form with 10 community-based collection holders and sought their feedback on the form and also the guide before we finalised those documents. We launched the project website and form 2 weeks ago, and we're now focusing on outreach to encourage people to complete the form. After the form closes, we'll deliver our project outputs and evaluate the project and determine next steps. So I think there are two main ways that you can help support this project. Firstly, if you're based in Victoria and your local library has a precarious oral history collection or potentially several collections, please visit precariosoralhistories.com and complete the simple online form. We know that there are many rich oral history collections in local libraries, and I think it's important for the list that we create to reflect that. Now, if you hold multiple oral history collections, you can either complete the form once to cover all your collections, or you can complete it multiple times so that you're filling it out once for each collection. And this really depends on the amount of time you have available and the level of detail you wish to provide. The form is open until the end of August, but I encourage anyone with a collection to please complete the form earlier rather than later. Secondly, please help us spread the word about the project via your networks. And I think this is relevant for those of you based anywhere, really, because as many of you will know, people and groups and organizations that might hold precarious oral history collections that are currently in Victoria. We're investing significant time and effort in our outreach efforts. I've been giving regular presentations about the projects to different groups. We're placing information about the project in key newsletters. Several history-focused organizations are actively promoting the project, and we are directly emailing as many possible collection holders to inform them about the project as we can manage. But we'd also really benefit from your help to get this project on other people's radars. If you have relationships with community projects or historical societies or individuals who have precarious oral history collections in Victoria, please let them know about the project and direct them to our website. We also have a promotional kit that we'd be happy to send you, and we have a downloadable project flyer on our website that you're very welcome to share with your networks. So to wrap up, there's a huge amount of work to be done to help save significant precarious oral history collections. But we see this project and the list and report that we'll create as an essential first step from which other work can later build. As I mentioned, our form and website launched 2 weeks ago, and we're already hearing about collections held by a range of types of collection holders, from academics to people in local libraries and local museums, to historical societies, which is really fantastic and encouraging. The form is open for just over 2.5 more months, so we're looking forward to hearing from as many collection holders as possible and to hopefully learning about a whole lot of oral history collections that are out there that just aren't on our radar at this stage. Here are my contact details. Please feel free to get in touch if you'd like to have a chat or to learn more, or if you have any queries, but I will wrap up there for now. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Anissa. Yes, I did the survey last week, I think, not too long ago. It took me about 20 minutes, and I found it a really valuable process just to see what we had in the collections. I found about 110 cassette tapes mostly from a previous historical society that doesn't exist anymore. And I'm sure that there are lots of other stories like that. I've also reached out to other teams in the council, such as the arts team, to see if they might have oral histories as well, because potentially it's not just public libraries within a council. It's also a really good networking opportunity to have a chat to any historical societies or family history groups and see what collections they have, and potentially other community organizations like sporting clubs may have done oral histories as well. So I think, yeah, I think it's going to create a really important evidence base. One of the topics that we were discussing at this seminar last year was around the need to advocate for oral histories, and I think this is going to uncover a lot of really valuable local history collections, and also is going to be a really useful tool to advocate for funding for their long-term preservation. So yeah, really happy to have you here today. We do have a question, thanks, from Denise, who just is asking, could you expand a bit on what you consider, do you consider oral histories held in local government, local studies collections precarious? So could you just go through again what you mean by precarious?
Thanks so much, Denise. Great question. I suppose the way we're thinking about it is what is eligible to be considered precarious, because at the end of the day, I think people who hold these oral history collections are best placed to decide whether or not they're confident their collections will be safe in 50 years, for instance. But in terms of the definition we're using, yes, I would say that local government collections are eligible to be considered as precarious, and the kind of two kind of components within that are thinking about whether the holding organization has or person has the resources to indefinitely update the digital, or potentially not even digital yet, recordings as systems and technologies change in future decades, and whether people or organizations have the resources to indefinitely manage the interviewees' chosen access conditions well into the future. And so if people have any doubts about those, then we'd encourage you to fill in the form.
Tonya Lewis, thanks for your question. She asks, in Victoria, we are being encouraged to load any digital materials onto Victorian collections, which is auspiced by Museums Australia, and I think harvested to Trove. Are you confident this is a safe digital repository into the future compared to somewhere like the State Library of Victoria? So yeah, I think it's actually good that Matthew's coming up next, because he's going to talk about some tools that are really important to digital preservation, like format shifting and checking for checksums and bit rot. So I don't know how familiar you are with Victorian collections, Anissa.
Thanks, Tonya. Great question. I think Victorian Collections is a fantastic platform, and it certainly makes a whole lot of collections hugely discoverable and accessible. So I think it's great when oral history material is appropriately made available through that platform. I'm probably not the right person to answer that question about the safety of Victorian collections moving forward, just because I'm not across the intricacies of how it's been designed and managed in its long-term plans. But I would say that if you have a collection and you're not sure whether or not this project in this form is eligible, if you have a look at the flyer or the website, we've got a few guiding questions that will help you decide that. And I think bigger picture, it's certainly better that more collections are in places that are providing resources for oral history moving forward, regardless of where that is.
Yeah, I think long-term preservation is something really difficult for councils to do by ourselves. It's also very time intensive, and yeah, it does involve yeah, a lot of time and care and skill. I think something to keep in mind is that digitization doesn't equal preservation. So it's something for us to think about around what do we actually need to preserve the collections that we have in 50 years' time. And I'm really glad that you're really getting us to think about the long term, not just the short term. So Anissa, we're just out of time, so really great to hear about this project, and I'm sure it was also valuable for people in other states today to start thinking about what's going on with their oral history collections. I think we've put the website into your chat, so we'll reach out to you with any questions that we have, and we're really looking forward to seeing the results from the survey.
Thanks so much, Nicole. I can see there are a couple of other questions in the chat, and I'll respond.
Oh, thank you. That'll be great. Yeah. So just moving along now to our last speaker for this oral history session, Matthew Burgess. Matthew is the lead digital archivist from the State Library of New South Wales. He's going to share with us some free resources and available training from the Digital Preservation Coalition. So thanks, Matthew, so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm just going to share my screen. So hopefully you can see that slide.
Yes, thanks.
Great. And apologies if I lose my voice. I'm recovering from illness at the moment, but I'll give it a go. So hi everyone, my name is Matthew Burgess. I'm the lead digital archivist at the State Library of New South Wales, where I lead the digital curation team. So I chair the library's digital preservation development group, and I also lead the digital preservation network for national and state libraries Australasia. So we're lucky here at the State Library of New South Wales to have around 5 full-time roles working in digital preservation across both digitized and born digital collections, but I will say we don't have a dedicated digital preservation team. So I'm here today to talk about digital preservation, and particularly on doing what you can with what you have. Just picking up on what Nicole said earlier, whenever I talk about digital preservation, I always start with this. Digitization is not digital preservation. So when I talk about digital preservation, I'm talking about the ongoing activities required to ensure continued access to digital materials over time. So regardless of whether something is born digital, so that is created and maintained in a digital format, or digitized from physical materials like audio cassettes from oral histories, it requires ongoing care. So digitization needs digital preservation. Making your digital collections available online or storing them in a digital asset management system is also not necessarily digital preservation. It should be the result of digital preservation. So digital material is ephemeral. It's interpreted through technology. Unlike our paper-based collections, you can't pick up a floppy disk or a CD and read it visually. You need a specific set of hardware and software to render it first. We cannot provide access to digital materials if they're not preserved, with action required to maintain access beyond the limits of media failure or technological and organizational change. Digital preservation is not a system, and there is no one-size-fits-all process or solution to solve this challenge. Systems can help implement digital preservation actions at scale, and policies based on good practice and standards guide work in this space. Digital preservation is not just a technical problem. It requires people and ongoing resources to manage digital material over time. Digital preservation actions are preemptive responses to potential risks for digital material. So these include media obsolescence. How many of you have a computer that can read floppy disks or even CDs these days? Storage failures. I know that I personally have had hard drive failures and several USB thumb drives that no longer work. File formats that can no longer be rendered in modern software. Natural disasters, which I'm sure we're all aware of in today's climate, as well as human error and malicious damage through cybersecurity incidents. So this is what we saw with the British Library in 2023. We can't solve everything all at once. And we also need to consider what is achievable within our organizational and resourcing context. So it's important to acknowledge that it will take people and time. And so you need to set achievable goals with what's available to you. Small steps over time can have a big impact on mitigating risks to digital materials. And I thought today would be a good opportunity to highlight some freely available resources to help with this. So I'm not going to go through into detail about specific tools or terminology. I'm going to highlight some tools that can help you with all of this. So the Digital Preservation Coalition is a membership organisation focused on advocacy, community engagement, workforce development, good practice, and good governance for digital preservation. So I'm not here today to spruik membership, rather to focus on some of their freely available resources that will help you do what you can with what you have. So the DPC has been operating for over 20 years, previously more heavily focused in the UK and Europe. But over the past 5 years, it has expanded its reach globally, and it's opened an office in Australia based in Melbourne, and it's also recently opened an office in the US. So the State Library is a member through shared membership with National and State Libraries Australasia, and I have chaired the regional stakeholder group for the Digital Preservation Coalition for the past year. While some of their material, such as recordings of events, is limited to members, a lot of their material is freely available and sometimes following an embargo period. The DPC supports community efforts to share knowledge and information relating to digital preservation, which is why they make it freely available. The Digital Preservation Handbook provides an internationally authoritative and practical guide on managing digital material over time, and also the issues in sustaining access to them. It's a useful reference point for digital preservation activities and includes a really handy glossary that can help with the heavy use of jargon in this space. It's aimed at a very broad audience, and it's wide-ranging in content and topics that cover the life cycle of digital objects. If you're after guided learning as a starting point in digital preservation, then the Novice to Know-How is a free online course on digital preservation skills for beginners. So I actually always ask staff in my team to do this course as part of the onboarding process, and regardless of previous experience or qualifications. I think it's a great introduction or even a refresher on digital preservation, and it is worth the time investment to complete it. It provides a lot more detail on digital preservation than I've given today. It discusses conceptual models. It also demonstrates some software tools. It's a good starting point, and you can sign up for free on the DPC Learning Portal. The Community Archives Digital Preservation Toolkit is another great resource. So this was released by the DPC in November last year for World Digital Preservation Day. Some components, such as the case studies and community group contacts, are UK-based, and this is due to the nature of the funding to create this resource. But overall, the material is location agnostic. There has been some discussion in the regional group on creating a local version of this toolkit, particularly focusing on Indigenous community archives, but there are no firm plans yet. This toolkit provides a matrix of a wide range of topics and levels, providing guidance based on your level of knowledge and your capacity. So here is an excerpt on the topic Make Copies from the toolkit matrix, and this is focusing on storage. So for example, level 1 talks about making more than one copy of digital collections and storing one copy offsite. If you want to go up to the next level, this invokes the 3-2-1 rule, where you have 3 copies of every file on 2 storage mediums with at least 1 copy offsite. And then up to level 3, that's a step further by including checking all of your copies to make sure they've not changed. This is referred to as fixity checking, with a variety of methods available. So I encourage you to have a look at this toolkit for some pointers on taking some small steps in the right direction. It's useful if there are specific areas that you want to tackle first, or you can read the whole toolkit and pick up just one thing to do from each topic to start your digital preservation journey. One of the first things I did when I joined my current team many years ago was create an asset register, which is essentially a spreadsheet that's developed over the years. Digital asset registers are important for managing your digital material. So it's a tool for gathering information and facilitating efficient management of its preservation. It's particularly important for incoming collections that have not been processed, and it provides information needed to plan and prioritize your activities. So I often say to my colleagues that if born digital material is not on the register, we don't know about it and it won't be preserved. So the DPC released the Digital Asset Register Toolkit last year as well, and this offers a practical step-by-step guide on how to build, use, and maintain one. It provides a recommended basic template, which is derived from analysis of 14 real-world registers shared by practitioners. I shared ours with the DPC for this. Anyone who has anything to do with digital preservation will tell you about the importance of advocacy. It's a big part of the job. So the rapid assessment model is a great way to benchmark organizational digital preservation maturity and also to set goals to improve or maintain them. So it provides a mechanism to demonstrate the impact of investment in undertaking digital preservation activities. Here at the State Library, it's part of our digital preservation framework. You can see our results from last year on the screen here, which we also publish with the document on the library's website every 2 years. There are a lot of other freely available resources on the DPC website, from toolkits to research reports and blog posts. So I highly encourage you to check them out. I've got some questions and discussion time now. So I've kind of got some prompts up here on the screen, but I'm also happy to answer any questions if anyone has some. And I will also try and put those links in the chat if someone hasn't already. Looks like they're there.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of amplify using the rapid assessment model from the Digital Preservation Coalition as an advocacy tool. I think it can feel really overwhelming, but it's a really good way to get a team together. So like the IT team at the Council of the Records team, getting approval from your library manager just kind of puts it on the agenda. And I think also just thinking in terms of an asset register, things that we might have not just in the library catalog, but third party websites like YouTube or History Pin, we need to consider looking after those as well. I just invite everyone to put into the chat any answers to Matthew's questions. The first one is, what types of digital material are you currently managing or worried about preserving? I think, well, actually, after Matthew, we're going to hear from Mia Pearden, who is doing research projects on local studies collections, and she recently did a pilot survey through the local studies SIG here in Victoria and found that we were all collecting similar things. The difference was in the amount of things that we're collecting. Just kind of check the chats. Comment from Kerry. Great to see you, Matthew. There is also the ALIA Digitisation and Preservation Specialist Interest Group. We do regular webinars on all sorts of topics. Yep. And Meredith comments, I agree with Ellen. It would be really good to feed some of this information back to our customers who want to use our preservation stations, because as Matthew so clearly highlights, this is not a one and done situation. So if you had to start with just one thing tomorrow, what would it be? And has anyone already taken small steps towards digital preservation? What worked and what didn't? People must be thinking, or I know that there are some libraries who have taken some steps towards preservation. I know there's some software like Recollect that has some embedded preservation functionality in it, like format shifting for the best standard, which is automatic. So anything that's automatic would be really good. Matthew, maybe you could talk about some of the tools that you use. I think I see Kerry's just mentioned she uses bagging and droiding procedures.
people think iCloud is the answer to everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to. Cloud storage is an interesting one. I guess in the context of oral histories, you may not be concerned about file system metadata, such as date created of a file, for example, because often with an oral history, you have that information as part of it. You know, generally an oral history will start with the person saying who they are, where they are, and the date. So you kind of know when that was created. But with cloud storage, it can change the date time stamps on files. So if you have a manuscript collection, for example, with Word documents, and you want to rely on those date time stamps for contextual information, there can be some changes. So, you know, SharePoint, for example, will often change dates. So you need to kind of think about what type of digital collection you're working with, and what impacts the storage can have on that. Kerry mentions bagging and droiding. So bagging refers to the structure of files according to the Bagot file packaging format. The key thing with this is it includes the files and what's called a checksum, which is a unique fingerprint for that file. If the checksum changes, then the file has changed in some way. Pardon me. You can use software like Bagger from the Library of Congress to create and validate bags, which is what we do here at the State Library in terms of our incoming collections. They are bagged onto network storage prior to ingesting them into a digital preservation system. Droid is a tool from the National Archives UK, which is used for file format identification. And it's based on a file format registry, which doesn't have every single file format in existence in it. It's based on what's in the UK National Archives, but also community submitted file formats. So Droid is a tool that you can run across your files, and it will identify them if there's an entry in Pronom, which is the file format registry. So some people, as a standard practice when they're receiving collections, is they might bag it so they can establish fixity, so they can make sure that the content isn't changing, and then they might run Droid across it so that they can identify what they have. And if Droid can't identify it, then that means some research is required on either identifying a file format that's not in the registry, or looking at what's so different about this particular file that it's not being identified.
I think a lot of libraries might probably be at the stage where we have digitized some items like photos, because they're always really popular. They'd be made accessible on our catalog. We probably, hopefully, made like a master copy and an access copy. What if that's the stage a library is at, like, what would be your recommendations, Matthew, for some next steps we could look at taking?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to looking at that community archives toolkit, which I think would be a good first step. And so I showed storage as an example from that toolkit on purpose, because storage is kind of like the first thing you should be looking at, and that's ensuring you have multiple copies. So, you know, if you've put a copy online, that's great, but that's not a preservation copy. You need to think about, you know, your preservation copy is the original, so that, you know, if something goes wrong online, you can always pull it back from that preservation copy. So you should be aiming for that 3-2-1 rule. So that's 3 copies of every file on 2 different storage technologies and 1 offsite. And then looking at your fixity practices. So using the Bagot file packaging format is one method, but it's not the only method for fixity. And file format identification is really useful, because even with digitized material, if those files can't be identified, it might tell you that there's a problem with maybe some digitized equipment, or a file transfer has failed, and so it's corrupted the file in some way. So kind of, yeah, looking at your storage, looking at your fixity, and looking at your file format identification are kind of some really basic steps that you can take without a system in place. And you can use these tools like Bagger, like Droid, to run them across your whole collection. It might take time depending on how big your collection is.
Yeah, and I think something to remind ourselves is that a lot of us might work part-time. We might have, you know, during those 20 hours, we might do desk shifts. We respond to inquiries. We organize programs. So I think there's potentially a few people going, droiding and bagging sounds great, but like, how am I going to get the resources to do that? So I guess the first step is just kind of advocating that, and just, I think, amongst ourselves, educating ourselves and then educating our managers, and advocating for the resources that we need. I think you mentioned, I mean, the State Library has a really big collection, but you have a team of 5, even though you don't have a kind of dedicated digital preservation person. I think ultimately, to me, a solution to this is for public libraries to work and share our processes together as we kind of build acknowledgement and support to take care of the resources that have been entrusted to us. Tara writes, advocating your preservation needs to IT. Yep.
And I think that's
and
where the DPC RAM can be useful at that starting point, because it does provide that visualization, and you can kind of say to your management, to your IT department, like, you know, here we are at level 0, level 1. If we do this one thing, that'll bring us up to the next level. And it's kind of, you know, that advocacy piece. But I think, you know, it is tricky because this does require dedicated time. So it's not necessarily something you can do while you're on a desk shift, for example.
No.
Some of these processes you can start it. So you can, you know, start that droid scan at the beginning of the day and come back to it at the end of the day. But it does require dedicated time to do these things.
Yeah, so Gillian writes, we use Recollect, but for every uploaded file, I create an access high-res JPEG and archive TIFF format file stored on an external hard drive. Okay. I also add all the metadata associated with the photo, etc., so the information is not lost.
And that's something important to note with Fixity. When you're adding metadata to a photo, that changes the checksum. So when you're looking at creating bags, if you're going to use that standard or any sort of Fixity process, you need to establish when is that file no longer going to change, or when do you want to track it so that it isn't going to change anymore. So anytime you write metadata into a file, it's going to change that checksum.
Yeah.
But changing a file name does not change the checksum. So that's why the Bagot standard is useful, because it's showing the file name and the checksum. So it's verifying both of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, Leonora writes, thanks, Matthew, very useful. Kerry's going to do a demonstration of Bagot and Droid at the October webinar of the ALIA group. Okay, so that sounds like it might be a really good next step for us. And I think if you're a member of ALIA, that is going to be free. Kerry, if you've got a link to register for that, it'd be great if you could put it in the chat.
The
So
novice
I think,
to know how, sorry, I was just going to say, the
yeah.
novice to know how course also does show these tools, and it does let you click through and see how to use them. So that's also a really good introduction to these tools.
Okay, yeah. Okay, well, I think unless there's, okay. Hong, is it okay to rely on Internet Archive Wayback Machine to digitally preserve historical society websites?
It's an interesting question. The Internet Archive does have a commercial service for web archiving, and often customers will kind of put that preservation onus on them as a service. But you do need to factor in that it is a service, so it's a private company. And you need to look at the risks associated with that. So whether you want to also get a local copy of something that has been archived. The internet isn't forever. The Internet Archive is not forever. It is a private company. It's just like Facebook. It's just like Twitter. Obviously,
MySpace.
yeah, exactly. So it's kind of just looking at the risks. I think for the moment, the Internet Archive is safe, but that's not necessarily going to be the same. I can't guarantee that in 5, 10 years, 100 years time. So yeah, this comes back to the, digital preservation is ongoing. It's not just something you do and then it's done. Things change and you've got to reassess as things change.
Yeah. And I guess that's something for us to consider when embarking on digitization projects. Like, do we actually have the capacity and the systems in place to care for them in the long term, or to have that set up? Or do we just want to get them up there so people can access them for the time being? Sasha has a comment that access to the tools and the tech needed is becoming increasingly difficult, with lots of barriers to access with IT, DS security in bigger organizations. Yes, so I've had some problems. You mean you try and download a tool and IT blocks you because it's not secure, and it's a whole process to get approval to download it. Yeah. Yep. So I guess that comes back to advocacy. So if you could potentially do the Digital Preservation Coalition's RAM together with someone from IT, they can help advocate in that department and smooth some of those wheels for you. And Kerry just says no link yet, but it'll come up in the ALIA newsletter around the training that she's going to do. Hi, William. He says, I agree, Sasha. IT processes and systems at councils can change without much notice. Advocacy with IT can be difficult. Funnily enough, I'm still trying to get access to DigiPres, ALIA group in my organization. Okay. So I don't know, Matthew, maybe you could talk about your relationship with your IT at the State Library. How do you get them on board?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it is like this whole relationship with IT is always a discussion point with anyone working in digital preservation. Just as an aside, the IPRES International Conference on Digital Preservation is happening in November this year in Wellington, New Zealand. I'm mentioning that because I will be on a panel discussing this exact problem on working with IT and digital preservation. Also for context on that, I've just recently finished chairing a working group for the NASLA Digital Preservation Network on cybersecurity and digital preservation, because there has been a big impact across a lot of NASLA libraries, National State Libraries Australasia, with increased cybersecurity practices, particularly following the British Library incident. And the way we're going about this is we've written a very short briefing paper that kind of talks about the fact that we need to work together on this problem, but we've actually documented some case studies of a digital preservation challenge that was caused by a cybersecurity control and how we resolved that. And our aim here is, by sharing these case studies, other libraries can go to their IT and say, well, look, this is how New South Wales is solving this challenge. So an example of that, I wrote a case study on New South Wales. We did a big cybersecurity uplift project over 2 years. And part of that, they removed all administrator privileges and introduced this software called Airlock that basically blocks everything unless it's on an allow list. So part of introducing these cybersecurity controls, we actually couldn't operate some of our software because some of it requires elevated privileges to run. So for example, we use ISOBuster as a software application for creating disk images from DVDs and CDs, and that requires elevated privileges to create those disk images. The solution to this ended up being a new feature that Microsoft released as part of their management of users, where you can actually, as a standard user, you can run an application with elevated privileges, and then that gets approved through IT. So they've got these structures in place. Hopefully we can, these case studies will be published and can be shared more widely. So you can see detail on that, or I can provide detail if anyone wants to know. But yeah, so from the NASLA side, we're approaching this by documenting case studies so that other libraries can learn from them, but also aid in those discussions with IT. Because I guess the key thing is, if you don't have a very close working relationship with your IT, and you're like, hey, I need this software that's created by some guy in America, they're going to be like, well, why do you need that?
Yeah.
So it's kind of, you need to demonstrate that what you're asking for is in use by other libraries. And you do need to establish a working relationship, because if you are doing digital preservation, you will be having a lot of conversations with your colleagues in IT. So here at the State Library, we've developed this relationship over a number of years. I've been in my team for 8 years or so now. IT staff have changed over that time, but I've continued working very closely with them, and we now have quarterly meetings to say, is everything okay? What do we need to work on now? We have a digital preservation lab where we have dedicated computers and technology for doing this work. So having these regular meetings, we can kind of flag issues and look at solutions. But I think that shared advocacy amongst libraries is also a really important tool as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear that the State Library is having the same issues, just advocating to IT as we're having on the local level. Yeah, Tonya says they have regular library IT liaison meetings scheduled in. I think that's one really good idea. And Matthew, I was just wondering a slightly different question. The idea of preservation, digitization, and sustainability. I think there's been a lot of information come out around the environmental impact on some of these processes. I'm just wondering what your thinking is around that, and what are some of the things that you're doing to take that into consideration?
Yeah, it's a good question and comment, and I guess this comes back to the earlier comment about iCloud or the cloud. Like, the cloud, funny, I've got clouds behind me. The cloud isn't just up in the sky, it's someone else's computer, and it's essentially a big data center, and data centers use up so much energy and water. And so, going back to what I was saying before about your 3-2-1 storage, you've got to think about the environmental impacts on how many copies you have. And there's different storage technologies. You can talk about hot and cold storage. So hot storage is your cloud storage vendor where it's available immediately as you need it. But there's what they call cold storage, which is offline tape storage, data tapes, which isn't constantly running all the time. So therefore, the environmental impact of that data would be slightly less. Bringing it back to the rapid assessment model, I'm pretty sure there is an environmental component in there. I think it's challenging as someone who kind of is involved at, I guess, the strategy of digital preservation at the State Library. I do somewhat feel like environmental controls are somewhat out of my hand, because if you think about the library as a building, if you think about the infrastructure that's managed by other people, other teams, and I can't say, the rapid assessment model said we need to do better, so X, Y, Z. I think it's important to consider the environmental impacts of decisions that you can actually make. So that storage example. But, State Library, we have not just our digital preservation storage, but we've got our corporate systems, we've got our websites and all this sort of stuff. So storage is a big component. But I think if you are interested in the environmental impacts of digital preservation, there were some really great keynotes as part of past IPRES conferences that are freely available online. And there was a particularly good one, I think it was from 2022. One of the keynotes was talking about data centers and the environmental impacts of those. And so I recommend looking that up if you have an interest. I think the Digital Preservation Coalition may also have some resources on this as well.
Okay. All right, it's just about lunchtime. I want to give a huge big thanks to our 4 speakers this morning, Maria Savides, Christopher Cheng, Anissa Puri, and Matthew Burgess, and to everyone for your questions. Thank you so much, Matthew. That gave us a lot to chew on. We're going to take our lunch break now and reconvene for the second session for today at 1:20 Eastern Standard Time.
Right. Hi, everyone. We might get started if everyone's back online and feeling ready to go. I hope you had a nice lunch break after what was a fascinating session on oral histories this morning. My name is Annabelle Tonkin and I work at State Library of Queensland. I'm not a librarian myself, but I work with the Queensland Local Studies Group and our heritage collections at State Library. Before we officially begin our second session, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today. I'm joining you from Yagara and Turrbal country and would like to pay my respect to elders past and present and any First Nations colleagues we have joining us today. Just like yesterday, we'll have a few 10-minute talks, so please pop your questions in the chat and our speakers will get to them when they can. It may be at the end of their presentation or throughout the afternoon. We're kicking off with Kyla Stephen from Gold Coast, who will be presenting on the impact of Cyclone Alfred in Queensland. So, hi Kyla, I'll get your presentation up and we can get started.
Thank you. Lovely, thank you very much. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the original inhabitants of the area this presentation was written, including the Yugambeh people and family groups within, and recognise their connection to land, waters and resources in the area we now know as the Gold Coast. We pay our respects to elders past and present. As Annabelle said, I'm Kyla Stephan. I'm Supervisor of Local Studies and Corporate Libraries with the City of Gold Coast. And every region, collection and emergency response is unique. But today I'm going to share what we did and what we learned following a recent weather event. So next slide, please, Annabelle. Cyclones on the Gold Coast are infrequent, but of course severe damage and loss of life in the past. On the 21st of February 2005 or 2025, severe tropical cyclone Alfred started to form off Cooktown. Over the following fortnight, it fluctuated in intensity as it made a slow and very erratic journey in the Coral Sea before turning towards Gold Coast and Brisbane. On Wednesday, the 5th of March, non-essential Gold Coast City Council staff were asked to leave work and prepare their own properties and assist family and neighbours. Libraries closed to the public from 3 p.m. on the same day. The cyclone weakened before reaching Bribery Island on the 8th of March, but its strong winds, heavy rainfall and powerful waves caused coastal erosion, flooding, impacts to flora and fauna, widespread power outages and structural damage. More than 500,000 customers in the region lost power. Next slide, please, Annabelle. Preparations to protect the local studies collection were informed by council, weather advice, staff's familiarity with the building and collection, and knowledge of historic storm events. The decision was made that it was better to spend days preparing for an event that seemed unlikely rather than spend years salvaging a large collection. At best, we looked foolish, and it would provide a trial one for a future, more genuine emergency. At worst, we wouldn't need to explain why the collection was damaged due to inaction. Next slide. While there was an advance warning of the cyclone, the closure of libraries meant that there was less time to prepare the collection while also attending online updates relating to emergency preparation. The priorities were removing the collection from open shelves or near windows, covering as much as possible, including our compactus, with tarpaulins, tying them down, and relocating the disaster kits closer to a doorway so they were highly visible and more accessible. Every tarpaulin, strap, and cable tied was used, more were purchased. The preparation work was finished 15 minutes before closure when staff gathered up laptops, printed documents, took photos, and left the building. Next slide, please, Annabelle. Referring to the disaster plan prior to closure was not a priority as it focused on recovery more so than preparation. Upon reflection, we needed something that explicitly outlined what to do with the gift of advance warning. The disaster kits were also designed for recovery rather than prevention. The disaster plan also did not reflect recent staff or organisational changes and required tweaking. This was done as soon as possible with the updated version forwarded to stakeholders, with a request to print it if possible with the updated version forward to stakeholders and to save them if possible as PDFs to local work devices. Photos of the preparation were shared with staff who weren't on site, so they knew what was being done. But as the weather deteriorated, more people requested a copy. But while I still had Wi-Fi access to the corporate network and power, others did not. Outages were spreading and staff were moving to other platforms trying to communicate. Luckily, and it was entirely luck, it was possible to share copies of the document with everyone before the window of opportunity closed. And you've been beautifully preemptive with the slides, so we're where we need to be, Annabelle. We were made aware of damage in the local studies library, which is located on the first floor of Southport Library, when a message was shared that security cameras captured water and damage inside. It wasn't possible to enter the building to assess the collection, as the priority was to check for structural and safety issues. 2 library staff were given permission to enter on Monday the 10th to walk through. Both floors of the building had been impacted, but the most significant damage occurred upstairs in the local studies library. Water had entered through the roof, areas of carpet were soaked, water had run down walls, sections of ceiling tiles had collapsed, and cables in the ceiling were visible. A length of roof flashing that had been peeled back by the force of the wind provided a view of the neighbouring high-rise from the comfort of inside the library. It could have been much, much worse. Inspectors who'd entered the building before staff had done their best to stop further damage, and that included covering a computer by removing the plastic sheeting protecting the rare book cabinets. Astonishingly, not a single item in the collection was harmed, but the risk of mould was obvious and visible outside the main entry door. We completed the walkthrough, recovered the rare book cabinets, quickly wiped up pools of water from furniture on both floors using cloths pulled from the disaster kits, and left. A colleague suggested buying moisture absorbers as an interim measure. Next slide, please, Annabelle. While personal safety is a priority before collection recovery, the time between building damage occurring and being able to return to focus on the collection was 5 days. 1 week after the library initially closed, staff were able to enter the workroom and actually spend time in it, but not in the public area or the collection within that space. Next slide. Dozens of small disposable moisture absorbers were purchased and placed everywhere. Books previously on display were laid flat to minimise the risk of pages exposed to a damp environment distorting. Tarpaulins were kept in place. The air conditioner was turned on 24/7 and all internal doors were kept closed. The humidity monitors were checked, but we realised they were outdated and not reliable guides. Wet vacuums or fans to dry the area were either unavailable due to both the staff not being available to bring them in or the equipment being on the other side of floodwaters. So we sought guidance from the State Library of Queensland and the Museum of Queensland. They suggested portable dehumidifiers if the moisture absorbers were insufficient. Thankfully, the moisture absorbers worked, and the carpet was cleaned earlier than anticipated. And over 90 days later, we've seen no evidence of mould in the collection, but we will still buy a portable dehumidifier and have replaced all of the humidity monitors and upgraded that part of our collection and how we learn about what's happening in it. Which means next slide is learning. What did we learn? Introduce an annual date to review and update your disaster plan. Personally, I've chosen April Fool's Day. Print copies are great, but a flexible workforce across a large geographical region needs remote access 24/7. Save copies on desktops or on corporate devices. While reviewing the disaster plan, check the contents of the disaster kit. And we could probably go to the next slide here too, Annabelle. Does it have everything listed? Are they in good condition? Have you pilfered through it over the year prior? Create a disaster preparation, even if it's just a tick sheet. If there's an opportunity, and it really is a gift, to prepare for an event, it's good to know where to start and whether you actually have the tools to do it. Know your priority collection items. Is it possible for others to quickly secure priority collection items if you're not there? Are there items you're willing to potentially sacrifice or allow someone else to make a decision about in your absence? It's better to prepare without using supplies that might actually be needed during a recovery process. How big are your tarpaulins, and can they be handled by one person if needed? Are there extra tarpaulins? Are they labelled to speed up preparation or even provide pathfinding and wayfinding for people unfamiliar with the space moving through it while library staff can't be present? Are extra tarps, buckets and sponges clearly visible to any contractors or work people who may have site and will have access to the site days before library staff do? Make your workroom or any storage spaces easy to navigate. Are cabinets clearly labelled with what they contain rather than complex classification schemes and descriptors that won't be meaningful to other people? Are other staff familiar with your storage areas? It takes time to get things back in order. Is there space to wipe large tarpaulins down, sanitize them, and fold them neatly so they actually fit back into any disaster kits you have? And how much Glen 20 is too much Glen 20? Is there a finite measure? And lastly, communicate, communicate, communicate. Documents in PDF and take photos. We're still implementing what we learnt, but now know that should we need to do it again, we will be much better prepared. So next slide, please, Annabelle. So there's my contact details should you need them, but thank you very much for the opportunity to speak and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks so much, Kyla. That was great. It was definitely, for those of us in Queensland, stressful and harrowing time at different points. As Ellen says in the chat, it sounds very challenging. Meredith says, I remember hearing your experience at the Queensland Local Studies meeting back in March. Great to hear 90 days later things are going so great. Absolutely. But I do like the choice of April Fools as a day to review your disaster management plan. That's great. And yeah, lots of practical considerations that we can take away and learn from that. Unfortunately, we never know when disaster is going to strike. I'll just introduce Glenn Harper from City of Monash and get Glenn's presentation up. Glenn will be talking about Flickr and making local history images accessible. So welcome, Glenn. Let me get your presentation up now. Glenn, you're just on mute.
I'll start that again. It's always tricky. The City of Monash acknowledges the traditional owners of the land on which I met you, the Wadjuri Wurrung and the Bunurong people, and recognises their continuing connection to the land and waterways. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and extend this to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So, Flickr.
Just getting your presentation up now, Glenn, sorry.
That's okay.
Thanks for your patience, everyone. I'm not so good with tech.
Yes, it is a classic library background. What you can't see is that I'm actually in a branch at the moment that's undergoing renovation. This morning there was bash, crang, wallop as people were dismantling shelving, and we're getting new shelving in. So fortunately it's a bit quieter this afternoon. So Flickr is a image hosting website. First, before we became aware of it with regards to Flickr Commons, which a lot of some pretty major libraries use, including Library of Congress. And can we go to the next slide, please? So I first started using Flickr before I came to the City of Monash. I did that with Frankston Library, and they had a volunteer scanning a load of local history photos, and they didn't know what to do with it. And I was the emerging technology librarian, so I said, put my hand up and said, let me at it. And I created a Flickr for them. Since I left them about 10 years ago, they haven't continued with that, but that's their loss. So I continued on with the idea at Monash when I got here. Flickr Pro is what we use, and it's pretty cheap. It's about $73 US a year. It's open to image search engines, so people can Google image searches and get your results for the Flickr. We can do high resolution uploads. People can do high resolution JPEG downloads. There's all sorts of metadata you can add to it through tagging. There's mapping as well. You can create links in comments. You can organize it into albums, add images to other groups. People can comment, people can favorite, people can add it to their own galleries, your images. You can organize, it's very convenient to organize images into albums. You've got unlimited uploads with the Flickr Pro, and as we will see later, there are some statistics that you can use. So we can go to the next one. The model I've developed here is that we use our own local history collection, both from the library and the Monash Council. And we also use public domain content that we can get from elsewhere. So National Archives of Australia, State Library Victoria, Public Records Office Victoria, and also we have some images that are used by permission from NLA and Monash Uni and so on. And that gives us a wide range of images. So they're not just photos, but as you can see there, there's a Mulgrave, what do they call it? Auction plan, and also lots of maps, loads of maps. So you can, through connecting these images from these wide range of sources, you can help to create the story of a locality. So for example, I've got there the BARM, British Australian lead manufacturing, because I used to have lead paint, of course, now Dulux. That's in our municipality. The factory is still there, PPG Australia. And I got from different sources, different photos from the outside and the inside. So you can tell the story from different aspects. And next slide, please. This is a montage of what it looks like. This is one of our most viewed photos. It's got over 23,000 image views. And this one, we sourced this particular one from the State Library Victoria, being a Wolfgang Sievers photo. When I found some more Wolfgang Sievers photos on National Library Australia, they then informed me that I should have actually sought permission from them, but they were all good. So I just had to change the copyright notices and things. So you can put all their content, you can put your own content in there and put links there. So some of the links I've put in to like Trove articles. I can add the images to different groups, which gives extra exposure. And also, for example, if you've got a train, you put it in a train group, people are going to tell you all about the train, which is wonderful. You can tag the item. You can also put the item into multiple albums. And those albums, you can get a URL for those albums. If we go to the next. And one of those albums which went wild, this is a really good case study, internal combustion, I call it. So anything that's driven by a internal combustion engine, cars, trucks. They didn't have EVs back in those days. I'm leaving out all the horse-drawn things. Every few months I put an album up on the library Facebook page. This one went wild. The algorithm gods smiled upon us. Everything just turned out really well. You'll see down here it's got 36 shares. I shared it to 17 local history, and I grew up in Monash. Well, no one says they grew up in Monash. I grew up in Glen Waverley. I grew up in Mulgrave. I grew up in Oakley, that kind of thing. All those kinds of groups. It then got shared into a bunch of other groups to do with cars. This particular one got then that on the Facebook algorithm, the original post went wild a bit more, got a lot more comments than none of our posts on our Facebook page, except if it's about Rainbow Storytime, gets comments. And that particular album had 2,249 clicks into it, so that's number of views. If we go to the next screen, please. And in one day, the whole thing exploded, and we got 64,820 views of our photos and things in one day. As you can see, we're going along as normal. The Facebook, that's our version of viral, which was wonderful. We'd never hit that heights again. Everything just aligned. So that's the reason why we use Flickr. We wanted to make things readily accessible. Flickr really does facilitate browsing as well. And yeah, we really enjoy our use of Flickr. The local history societies have not come along with us. They figured us out quickly that we wanted just to make things free and accessible, which they don't want to do. They said things like, then people would just know what we have. And so that's their loss. I would love to get them on board one day, but we can't as yet. So yeah, and yes, we do have preservation copies elsewhere. Stability of Flickr long-term. I've been using Flickr for a long time. They change their rules occasionally. They've actually made it harder to do the downloads and things a little bit lately, but it's still highly accessible, and that's really the point that we've been getting at. Any other questions or comments? And that's where you can find it. Sorry, I forgot about that one.
It's all right.
That's where you can find it. And the next screen is where you can find me if you want to email me.
Thanks, Glenn. If there's any more questions for Glenn, feel free to pop them through in the chat. I find Flickr a great place as a starting point for images that kind of tell a story. If you're putting together a mood board about a particular time or a particular subject, the tagging is a really great way to increase that searchability. And you never know when you're going to go viral or someone's going to take a great interest in something or some kind of image. Everything comes back in vogue at some point, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I love it when I post something and 2 days, I know it's our image because I scanned it, post it on Flickr, and 2 days later I'm seeing it on Facebook from somebody else.
Absolutely. It's like, there it is. And sometimes something we've been talking about recently in the Queensland Local Studies group is keeping the information with these images when we do put them out online. And sometimes, whether it is historical societies or local historians or researchers might be using these images and not really attributing correctly, and people don't know where they're coming from, and finding that balance of access and, I guess, retaining that information about the image and what's in it. But Nicole has put a comment, I guess that's a bit of a business model for historical societies. They need people to pay to join to access their collections for funding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's hard, but we're all about access here, so that's good. Thanks so much, Glenn. That was great. Just going to stop sharing screen, and our next speaker will be Samantha Figueroa from Wollongong City Libraries in New South Wales. And Samantha will be speaking about local Aboriginal community oral histories. So welcome, Samantha. I'll just get your
Thank you.
up and you can introduce yourself.
Excellent. My name's Samantha Figueroa and I work in local studies in Wollongong City Libraries. And today I will be speaking about the Hill 60 Stories, which is our local Aboriginal community oral history project.
Which there'll be a presentation for in ones.
That's fine.
Okay.
I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. And I would also like to extend my respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us today.
All right.
Yeah. If you could go to the third slide, please.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So Hill 60 Stories is a collection of oral history interviews on Wollongong City Library's Illawarra Stories website. It's a valuable project that captures history told by Aboriginal traditional owners and custodians and knowledge holders who share their connection to this place and the experience of their family members who lived on Hill 60 in Port Kembla, New South Wales. This area was part of traditional lands of the Aboriginal people who spoke the Dharawal language. Next slide, please. In April 2024, traditional owners and custodians were consulted by Wollongong City Council's Community Engagement Aboriginal Services Officer to gauge interest in sharing their stories. Introductions were made to the local studies team, who then consulted directly and built meaningful connections with the community members who wanted to be part of sharing the history of their ancestors in association with Hill 60. Great care was taken to ensure that each individual could share their story in their own way. These included interviews with traditional owners and elders such as Auntie Cheryl Davis Fulcher, Uncle Paul Cummins, Uncle Mark Petruski, Uncle Steve Russell, Uncle Lance Puckridge, Auntie Lorraine Brown, and Uncle Stuart Luland. Over the past few years, my colleague and I have been building up connections with the Aboriginal community members and attending yarning circles and conducting oral history interviews. Next slide, please. So new interpretive signage about the history of this area was placed by Wollongong City Council in December 2024 at Hill 60, Port Kembla, as part of the Narrabeen Trail. The history includes the displacement of the Aboriginal community and also the Hills war heritage. So Wollongong City Council consulted with the community members about the content for the signage, which included how in 1939 the Department of Defence commenced preparations to fortify Hill 60 in Port Kembla, and how by 1942 all the Aboriginal people were forcibly removed from Hill 60 and taken down the south coast. Next slide, please. The Hill 60 Stories page went live on the 19th of December 2024, when the interpretive signage was placed there. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people should be aware that in viewing this website, it contains images, voices, and names of deceased persons. Next slide, please. Hill 60's Stories sign links directly to the Illawarra Stories website, where our elders' voices can be heard sharing the history of this significant place. So the QR code's there for anybody who wants to link and hear the stories. I also have it at the end of the presentation if you missed this one. So the elders and traditional owners that share their experiences of this the saltwater people. The cultural traditions include importance of fishing at Hill 60 to this community. Next slide, please. So Uncle Steve Russell designed the terrazzo, which was placed on Hill 60. And Uncle Steve shares his family story as well as the meaning of this design. Next slide, please. Here's a sample of words from one of our elders, Auntie Cheryl Davis Fulcher. Hopefully it works.
Well, my mother grew up over there as a child with her parents and her siblings, and there was a fair few Aboriginal families that lived there, and my mother's family was the Bell family, and she grew up there and went to Port Kembla Primary School, and the connection is through my great-great-grandfather, William Walker, who was my mother's great-grandfather, and he died at at Minamurra in 1895, and his daughter Esther, she ended up living over Port Kembla with her husband James Bell, and then from then on, grandfather was born. So they all lived there and all had a connection through our ancestral ties.
Thank you. So if you want to hear her full story, that can also be accessed on our website, our Illawarra Stories website. Next slide, please.
Well,
So in addition to the Hill 60 stories relating to the ancestors who resided on the hill, the Aboriginal elders and community members shared their own life experiences and images which can be found on the Aboriginal community members page on Illawarra Stories. Next slide, please. So along with the oral history interviews, a collection of significant documents and images was shared and added to Wollongong City Libraries. Next slide, please. So inclusion of this information in Wollongong City Library's local studies collection helps to balance the colonial-centric histories and contribute to our library's strategic goal, which is to share, celebrate culture and history of Aboriginal traditional owners, custodians, and knowledge holders. Next slide, please. So it was an honour to sit with our local Aboriginal elders and custodians and community members and record the knowledge of this significant place. We were very pleased that this project's value was recognised and acknowledged by being shortlisted for the 2025 National Heritage Awards in the Aboriginal category. And we were just really grateful to be able to work with our local Aboriginal elders and collect their histories. And yeah, if there's any questions, let me know. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sam. We did have one question in the chat from Linda, which is asking if you can tell us a bit more about the documentation that provides access to the oral histories over time.
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, we have consent forms that that kind of outline where the stories will be viewed, heard and stored, so within the library and on our website.
We might let any other questions for Sam to just happen in the chat, just so that we can move on to our next speaker to try and keep to time. But thank you, Sam. That was
Okay, thank you.
great. And
No
if
problem.
you'll see, if you keep an eye on the chat, you will see some other questions coming through.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Amy Sheaf from Gympie Regional Council in Queensland. Hi, Amy. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Annabelle. Thanks for having me. And thanks everyone for joining me today for this presentation on events and outreach. So my name is Amy Sheaf. I'm the local history officer here at Gympie Regional Libraries, and I'm coming to you today from Kabi Kabi Gubbi Gubbi country. So I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and elders from other communities who may be here today as well. So next slide, please. Thank you. So to start off the presentation, I have a question for you all today. So are you looking for new ways to engage clients and also increase your client engagement by up to 50%? If you answered yes, you've come to the right talk today, because I'm going to discuss with you how our library has achieved this through events and outreach. So here at Gympie Regional Libraries, we love and encourage community participation and knowledge sharing wherever possible. With this in mind, we created a plan to regularly host a range of local history events and outreach at many locations. Next slide, please. So we have facilitated a range of presentations within our library event space. So our goal is to host events that appeal to a broad demographic and encourage audience participation. Some examples of events that we have hosted here include informative in-house presentations at the Gympie Library on topics such as the history of the Gympie Township, flood history, native plants and animals, Gympie soldier stories, transport history, timber history, and many more. Most of these presentations are presented by our library staff. However, we do invite local groups in to talk as well, such as Landcare and Gympie Family History Society, for example. Another event that we host is local history pop-up displays and memory sharing morning teas. So we visit our branch libraries in our smaller communities, such as at Kilkivan, to create local history displays. And these include things such as historical photographs, letters, books, historical artifacts that we collect from the community. So the morning teas provide residents with a chance to share their photos and memories with each other, and also provide us an opportunity to collect oral history interviews as well. As well as this, we also host local author talks here at Gympie Library. So through researching her own family history, one of our local authors discovered that her second cousin was a murderer on the mail train from Gympie to Bundaberg, which was a shock. But this actually inspired her to write a book. And then she came back to Gympie Library and she presented a talk on how she discovered this unique family history. So this talk also encouraged many others to start researching their family history as well. And next slide, please. Thank you. So after conducting many in-house local history events, we realised there were many members of our community who had first-hand local history knowledge and experience, who could not quite as easily access our local history room or the resources. So this was when we decided to start doing outreach and visit our local nursing homes. So during these visits to our local aged care homes, library staff presented presented talks on a range of local history topics. So these talks were a great success. The residents thoroughly enjoyed the presentations, and they would quite often describe their first-hand experience relating to the topics. So for example, during a presentation about the history of hotels in the Gympie region, a lady told the story of how her husband, who was a police officer at the time, rushed down the street to help extinguish a fire which happened at the Northumberland Hotel in 1969. It was a very interesting personal account of the event. And these visits have also provided the opportunity for oral history interviews, as the presentations have encouraged the residents to share these valuable memories, which can then be added to our local history collection. Next slide, please. Thank you. So one of my favourite quotes is, "Knowledge is power, but knowledge shared is power multiplied." And that photo there is a photo of our lovely library team members. And just back to the quote, so through the facilitation of our events and outreach, we encourage this sharing of knowledge through the outreach events. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So what are the benefits of doing events and outreach? So the first benefit is community engagement. So since commencing local history specific events and outreach, we have seen an increase of up to 57.6% in our local history engagement. So this includes queries, visitor numbers, and also our event numbers. So also another benefit is the preservation of local history. So as community members share their historical photos and memories with us, these are recorded and then added to our collection. Our long-term goal is to make these photographs and memories freely accessible to all the public through our library catalogue. As well as this, there's greater accessibility to information for everyone. So we record all of our presentations and we post them online to our Gympie Library's YouTube channel. So by doing this, it allows wide access to the content at any time and place as long as internet is available. Also, assisting the community through resource creation. So these recorded presentations can also be used in schools as teaching resources as well. So another great benefit. As well as this, new additions to online resources. So the information used in these talks is also added to our local histories blog, which is called Gympie Regional Memories, and the recordings are uploaded to our YouTube channel as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what are some considerations? So the first one is obviously time. So researching content for presentations can be quite time consuming. So it also takes time to source photographs to make the PowerPoint presentations too. So keep that in mind. Transportation costs. So we are very lucky here that we have a library car, which we can utilise for outreach to the nursing homes. So if you do not have access to a vehicle, then a consideration would definitely be the fuel expense for staff and also wear and tear on their vehicles as well, going to and from the events. So technology available. So before attending an aged care home, it's important to check to make sure that they do have a TV with a HDMI port available. So staff do bring a laptop and a 2-meter long HDMI cord each centre that they do visit. Staff then connect the HDMI to the TV to share the PowerPoint presentation. So before each outreach activity, it's important to check that you make sure you have the technology available. Perhaps you might need to purchase a longer HDMI cord or a laptop. These are all things to consider. As well as this, another consideration is COVID-19 testing. So I discovered upon attending the nursing homes that many still require a negative RAT test result before entering, and these can take up to 15 minutes. So just to make sure that staff have the extra time to be able to do that as well. Thank you. Next slide, please. So in summary, events and outreach provide excellent opportunities to engage clients, add to your collection, and contribute positively to the community. Next slide, please. So now we have a bit of time for questions, if anyone has any questions, and I'll pop my email in the chat as well if anyone would like to ask me questions that way too.
Anyone have any questions for Amy? Some might pop up in the chat in a minute as well. People might be writing them down.
Thanks.
Amy, that was great. I love the idea of bringing the library to other people. I think that's such an important part of access, especially with audiences that might not be able to access things online just by virtue of what they have around them or what they have access to. So yeah, I really enjoyed thinking about that. There's some great comments in the chat. So
thank you.
Yeah, some more questions might come through, but thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Annabelle.
All right, our next speaker and our last speaker for our 10-minute talks today is Kerry Shaw from City of Newcastle, New South Wales. So Kerry, I'd love for you to pop up and introduce yourself if you're here. Is Kerry on the online? Hi, Kerry. Are you able to, I can share your presentation, but are you able to join in as a presenter? I'll put up Kerry's presentation just while.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, how you going?
I'm okay.
Okay, let me see. Welcome, Kerry, joining us from Newcastle. Now, 1 second, I'll get your presentation up. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Present to the. All right. Sorry, if you just want to start, Kerry, I'll fix up with how it's appearing.
That's okay. Hello everyone. I'm coming to you today from Awabakal and Warramai lands here in Newcastle. And today I'm going to talk about when a collection snowballs, which is a bit of a take on our snowball collection. So here at Newcastle, I am the Cultural Collections Registrar, Digitisation. And so my role is to digitise our collections and make them available online, and we use Axial's EMU to do that. I'll put my email address in the chat, and you can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm also the co-convener of the ALIA Digitisation and Digital Preservation Special Interest Group. So that's why my comments were on Matt's presentation this morning. So Snowball was a gentleman that came to Newcastle in 1879, and he worked in and around the Newcastle area for about 50 years, and he used his wagonette from that first image, and he travelled around the Newcastle area taking plate glass negative photographs of the area as it developed. So we have an amazing collection at the library of his work. So he retired from photography in 1915. So his work goes from 1889 until 1915. And though he did take the occasional photograph right up until 1924, and he died in 1925. On his death, the negatives disappeared and were not found. So they were in the bottom basement of his house. In the 1980s, two historians found those negatives in cardboard boxes, moist, damp, mouldy, in the bottom basement of the house. 5,500 of those negatives were donated to the Newcastle Library, and somewhere in the region of 2,000 were destroyed, thrown in the bin by said historians because they deemed them not worthy enough to keep. The images were completely destroyed. And then the historians decided to keep about 1,000 for themselves because they really liked those ones. So recently we were approached by a company. Oh, so if we could go to the next slide, please. So these are our 5,500, or some of them. We also have some prints, and we have been redigitizing these since 2019, and I am hoping to have them finished by the end of this year, thanks to the work of my volunteers. So next slide, please. So the Stories of Our Town are a film group. They've done several films. They have their own YouTube channel. Please go and check it out. There's some really good stories. And they are mostly sort of self-funded, government-funded, New South Wales government, local government, and some industry. And they fund the two gentlemen making stories. They're an eclectic pair. One was the lead guitarist for the band Machine Gun Fellatio. So that might give you some idea of their personalities, but they're doing really great work on historical style documentaries. And so they approached us to do one on Ralph Snowball's collection, because the Snowball collection is absolutely famous in Newcastle. There's not a lost Newcastle or historic photograph on Facebook that is not of Snowball. So next slide, please. So because they constantly do do these documentaries, they constantly come to me for photographs from our collection to back up the documentaries. So over the past 3 or 4 years, I've supplied many photographs to them from the collection. And so when it came Snowball's turn, they knew where to come. Next slide, please. Where are we? Oops, this one. I've never done a film before. I don't know many of us that have done films before, maybe a TV interview, but I certainly hadn't done one before. And I thought it would be easy because I can talk underwater with a mouthful of marbles, as my family will tell you. But talking in front of a camera is a bit different. So these images from the filmmakers show you what it's like to be on camera. And I figured that what I should have probably done was had somebody show a torch in my face, tell me to not look at a mirror, and then talk to the mop head that was beside the mirror. And that gives you an idea of what you're supposed to do when you're talking to the camera. I learned a few things, like I wiggle too much when I talk, and also my glasses reflect the light. And that, according to my daughter, I have a customer service voice, and she'd never heard it before. So some things when you're doing films is stand still. Okay, next slide. So Tony here, he's pictured behind the camera, and Glenn is the lead guitarist and the instigator of the documentary. And they were very, very patient with me and allowed me to re-record several sentences that just came out a little wrong. And it was very good to watch the demonstration version. So they sent us a version in January, and the true version wasn't released until 3 nights before the premiere in March. And it was really interesting to watch the growth and the change of the documentary as they put it together. And I have a whole new respect for people who spend all their time and energy doing that. So next slide, please. So they also came and took some of the images. We ended up supplying 250 images to the documentary, which goes for 105. Just over an hour and 5 minutes, sorry. And so it gave me a new respect for the filmmakers and how they do it, and the research that went behind it, and also just the passion that drives these guys to make little to no money out of these films until they get so many hits on YouTube, and then they start getting advertising feedback. But it also showed me just how much work goes into the editing and the filming of it with the camera, plus they used a drone as well. Next slide, please. So we had a premiere night there was a local artist exhibition space that was used. They strung up some really big white sheets and showed it all. Some of Mr. Snowball's great-grandson was present, and an unusual circumstance with that is he actually is the spitting image of Mr. Snowball. And it was really creepy to see him, A, looking at me, but B, in full colour because all of the slides are negatives. And I'd always suspected that his eyes were blue, and his eyes would have most definitely been blue. So that was an unusual bit of creepiness that came in. The premiere was a good opportunity to talk to the audience about the digitisation process. And one of the things that I did on a bit of a whim, which proved to be quite successful, was I printed out life-size full plate, half plate and quarter plate images and stuck them to pieces of cardboard that could get passed around the audience. And so that showed people just how big some of these plates are, because one of them is almost, it's somewhere between A4 and A3 size. So they're really, really quite big. And it was good to get the audience feedback and some appreciation for the hard work of my volunteers, who also came to the premiere and star in the documentary for their really hard work, because without them, they wouldn't be digitised. So if you just go to the last slide. And so this is the YouTube. And so if you go to YouTube and you look for Ralph Snowball, it should pop up. At last view, it had 43,000 views. It's not all me. There's lots and lots of other people in it. So please feel free to have a watch. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kerry. That's really interesting. And I liked the use of the pun with the snowball. It sounds like it's a much beloved and known collection in Newcastle. So,
oh yeah, I did make a note after Glenn's comment. We measured the internet traffic to the collection and it went up by 1,500 in a month.
Wow, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
That's really great. And how good that we're able to measure those things and continue to demonstrate the importance of these collections to communities. If there are any questions for Kerry, we might keep them to the chat just for now. Sorry, Kerry, because of my delay with the tech, we are running a little bit over time. So thank you for your presentation, and anyone for questions or comments to Kerry, I can see some coming through. If we can pop those in the chat and Kerry can get to them, that would be great. All right, that finishes up our lightning talks for today, but we still do have one more speaker. So I'm very thrilled to be welcoming Mia Pearden, who was awarded the 2024 Marjorie C. Oh, it says 2025 on yours. Sorry, Mia. Marjorie C. Ramsay Scholarship to explore innovative approaches to heritage collections management in public libraries. Mia's project focuses on improving access to and engagement with local history and heritage collections, with a strong emphasis on amplifying cultural narratives, particularly those of Aboriginal communities. So welcome, Mia. Feel free to take it away.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Annabelle. I'm joining you from Wadawurrung and Dja Dja Wurrung country today here in Ballarat, and I would like to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I grew up on Yorta Yorta country on the banks of the River Kayela, which is the longest river in Victoria, and I would also like to acknowledge the precious experience and knowledge that I had on that country and the impact that it's had on my learning journey. And I'm sorry, I thought I turned my Teams off. I'm really excited and I feel really privileged to be the recipient of the 2025 Marjorie Ramsay Scholarship. Hopefully that's moving across. Maybe not. Has that slide moved over?
No, it hasn't, Mia.
Okay, we'll just try that again.
I sympathise.
Yeah, technology. Oh, it looks like it's working now. Okay, so what is the Marjorie C. Ramsay Scholarship, especially for those of you who are joining from outside of Victoria? So Marjorie Ramsay was a trailblazer, really, a visionary and a driving force in the world of libraries. So in the 1940s, she was the first qualified librarian appointed to a public library service in country Victoria, and she went on to transform Ballarat libraries, which makes it especially special for me. So she joined it to one of Victoria's first regional library services. She also served as the State Victoria Library's Deputy Principal Librarian in 1969 and its Principal Librarian from 1974 to 1981. So more than just a name, she was an innovator and a leader in public libraries. So this scholarship is offered through the State Library of Victoria, and it's designed to empower library professionals to develop bold ideas that enhance services, address community needs, and contribute to the future of libraries in a meaningful way. So the way that the scholarship offers support is through funding, mentorship, and opportunities for professional growth, empowering the recipient to lead projects, explore creative solutions, and collaborate with sector peers to create lasting benefits to communities and to the library sector more broadly. So both the Marjorie Ramsay and the Barrett Reed, which are offered through the State Library of Victoria, are open to all staff who are working in Victorian public libraries, not just those with a library qualification. Okay, so why did I apply? I've been working in libraries for just over 4 years now, and in 2023, and in part of 2024, I had the opportunity to work in a project local studies role for around 9 months. This was mostly because the Ballarat Library was closed for significant renovations, and the Heritage Collection, along with everything else, had been decanted and was in storage. So it was sort of viewed as an opportunity to ascertain what was in the collection, where it was stored, and it was a monumental task. And it was really just the unraveling of a whole heap of other threads. And when the role came to an end, I felt like I had just created more problems and more questions than I'd solved or answered. But what it did achieve was to drive home the point that the collection was in dire need of attention. It needed resourcing, time, management, care, sorting, and a whole lot of work around access. Knowing that I had this time frame was really helpful because it allowed me to focus on a few things and to set some achievable goals to focus the role. So among the collection were records from various children's homes, missions, and refuges in Ballarat from about 1901 through to the 70s. And no idea how they came into the collection. There's a story that they were on the back of a ute heading to the local tip, and the librarian at the time said, no, you can't possibly do that, and rescued them. And over the years, lots of attempts had been made to relocate the records. Some of them had been sent to a local organisation called CAFS, which works with children who are in out-of-home care. But the bulk of the collection, which was about 12 large archive boxes, sat with us. And so working with our local Australian Catholic University History Department, we were able to connect with the Archives Department at the Department of Health and Human Services. And about 7 months after first contact, 2 archivists drove up from Melbourne to collect the boxes, including the ones that had been sent to CAFS years ago. And that was a huge win for me, and sort of just showed what could be done. People had tried to do it over the years, but never had enough time to sort of keep going back and to keep following through. So in that project role, I also applied for a Public Records Office of Victoria grant for some restoration work on 2 folios from our rare book collection. We were successful in receiving $10,000, and these volumes have just come back to us from the Grimwade Centre. So you can see them on the screen there, and we'll have a launch later next month as part of Melbourne Rare Book Week. We also applied for a National Library Community Heritage Grant for a significance assessment on our Rare Book Week, on our Rare Book collection, and we were once again fortunate to secure that funding, and our significance assessment begins next week, which is really exciting. So the project role showed what could be done with the collection with some staffing and some resources. I see so much value in our collection, and I know that libraries all over the state, and in fact all over Australia, hold similar collections, and all of these stories that are woven into them of the people and places that came before us. I know that the public are interested in these collections. I've seen the response to events that I've organised or exhibitions that have been held in the library. So applying for the Marjorie Ramsay Scholarship felt like the next step in my sort of self-directed local studies education. I want to know what's held in libraries across Victoria, and I want to know what best practice looks like, to make sure that valuable and irreplaceable collections don't end up covered in mould or discarded. we've all heard the stories, and some of them are particularly heartbreaking, about the things that have been lost over time. So my project aims to investigate local studies collections across public libraries in Victoria using a mixed method approach. So gathering some data around what the libraries hold in their local studies collection, how they manage them, and what support they require to ensure that there's access for their communities and preservation of the collections. So the research will include a survey, which will be sent out to all public library services later in the year. And then following the survey, several library services will be selected for case studies, and they'll represent the breadth of libraries, public libraries in Victoria, so covering rural, regional, metropolitan locations and of various sizes and with various types of collections. Okay, so all of us here, we know the value of local studies collections. We understand that they tell the stories of a region and its people. Public libraries in Victoria and of course all across Australia are the holders of many stories, and countless of which we can find by searching a catalogue or by browsing the shelves at our local branch. But the stories in local studies collections are often more difficult to find, and sometimes they require the expertise of a local studies or heritage librarian to find them. They will know exactly what box on what shelf to find the document that you're looking for. Or maybe they don't, and maybe this is a library where the collection has been untouched for decades, and dust covers the lids of those boxes, or worse, there's mould or silverfish have found their way in. We don't know how local studies collections are managed in Victorian public libraries. We don't know what they look like, what they hold, who cares for them. There isn't any available data on which libraries have a rare book collection, or who has oral histories, who's digitised their local newspapers, who's put all of their historical photos up on Victorian collections. The information is missing, and we can't improve how we support libraries with local studies collections or the staff who are working with these collections until we have it. What we do know is that in 2022 and 2023, the Public Libraries Victoria Annual Statistical Survey identified that all public library services in Victoria, except for 2, have a local history collection. We don't know anything about the nature of these collections or what they hold, but this does suggest that local history resources are part of the collection of almost all Victorian public libraries. So why do I think that we need this project? Collecting this data addresses an urgent need to develop an evidence base on the diverse local studies collections in public libraries across Victoria. So the survey will gather data on what is held in the collections, including the format, the volume of the content, how they're managed, and how they're currently accessed. So how will having this data be useful? Well, at a library service level, it will allow staff to advocate to management, local council, library boards of the need for resourcing, whether it's staffing or funding, storage, improved access to training, and at a SIG level or a special interest group level for our Victorian Local Studies group, we can advocate for professional development, resources and other support. We can identify where the gaps are across our own collections, but also across Victorian collections as a whole. We've heard from various presenters over the last 2 days, including the presentation from Denver Public Libraries yesterday and from Alan yesterday, that we know that there are voices missing in our local studies collections. And this information can help us to identify gaps and to focus where we should be expanding our collections to ensure that all voices can be found in our collections so that we're representing our communities and all of those who live there. So for staff working in public libraries in Victoria, the Local Studies SIG is a way of connecting with other staff working with these collections, finding professional development, support, opportunities for collaboration, and the Public Libraries Victoria Local Studies SIG has just been immensely helpful to me in this project. But at the moment, the support that the Local Studies SIG can offer is limited by lack of information around what the collections hold, who manages it and how. So without this data, there's no opportunity to target that professional development or to tailor support. It's very difficult to advocate for these collections and the staff who work with them when we simply don't know what they look like. So this information would allow us to better advocate for the role of local studies in placemaking, in community building, including the growing challenges that libraries face regarding long-term access, curation, preservation, all the things we've been talking about over the last 2 days. So I mentioned the New South Wales audit briefly, and I'm sure everybody here is familiar with Ellen and her work, but this research paper has been really pivotal in the development of my project. Ellen identifies that very little has been written about local studies collections in peer-reviewed journals, and her research paper addresses the need to understand current collecting practices in local studies collections, and it highlights that local studies collections are vital for collecting, preserving, making available to the community the many stories and perspectives of an area. And as we know, in 2020, Alan led a local studies audit in New South Wales public libraries. And again, has been really helpful in the development of my project. So coming back to Victoria. So having this data will allow us a snapshot of what the local studies collections hold. And while it won't stay relevant forever, and like the New South Wales State Library team, we may find that we want to repeat the study down the track. The nature of our collections, our local studies collections, are that they are comparatively static. So the data would be useful for years to come. I hope that this project allows public libraries to improve our ability in documenting community memory, supporting inclusive storytelling, and improving the visibility and use of local studies collections across the state. So on this slide here, you can see my fabulous colleague, Jo. And this is a project that resulted from the short-term role when I was working with the Ballarat Library's Heritage Collection. So we have a collection of theatre playbills from the 1860s and 1870s, and they're in excellent condition, quite rare. And I was able to work with the National Library on a project to digitise them. We worked with a local art framer to have them framed, and they were the first exhibition in our newly refurbished Ballarat Library last year. We had a local Goldfields theatre academic give 2 sold-out lectures during Heritage Week. The printed bookmarks there, walked out the door, and we were featured on Trove as well with an article about the playbills and their significance. And this is just a small example of what can be done with local studies collections when they are supported. And why I feel that we need this survey, we need to have the missing information. Okay, which leads me to what I've done so far and where to from here. So I've completed a literature review and begun to put the Victorian local studies collections in context. Working with the Public Libraries Victoria Local Studies SIG group has been incredibly and just immensely valuable. The conveners, Nicole, Julie, and also Liz and others have been super supportive and helpful and so generous with their experience and their wisdom, and I wouldn't have been able to work on this project without them. With their assistance, and in order to ensure good survey design and to make sure that we're asking the questions that we want answered, we have gone to our local studies SIG recently, just in the last month, and asked them to complete a short survey. So in part, it is to test some of the kinds of questions we want answers to, but also to get input from our local studies SIG members and to start seeking out library services who are keen to volunteer to be a case study to get that qualitative data. So we received 20 responses to our short survey, and it was really useful in identifying how our questions would need to be refined, rephrased or expanded. And already just from these dozen or so questions, some interesting observations have come through. So for example, in response to the question, how many hours per week are allocated to managing local studies collections, we had at one end of the spectrum 2 hours. We receive a few inquiries from the public and periodically run ancestry classes. And at the other end, approximately 55 hours provided by 2 permanent part-time staff. Another question asked, if your library service has material not catalogued or processed, please list it below, including an estimation of the amount and format. And we had answers such as, we currently estimate there are approximately 30,000 uncatalogued items in our archive collection, or most of these are documents and photographs. We also had another answer, most of this material is not catalogued. And finally, an unknown quantity, multiple boxes of photographs, textual material, ephemera. So just from this really small amount of data, already we have some insight into these local studies collections and how they're being managed. We're starting to see what some of the common issues or problems may be. And when the final survey is rolled out to all Victorian public libraries later this year, I hope its results allow us some insight into the collections, who's working with them, what help, support, training or assistance that they need to get the best out of their collections and to best preserve and protect them, all while facilitating community access. I hope that the data that gathered allows us to advocate for these incredible collections and the stories that we all know are woven through them. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mia. That was wonderful. Really interesting to hear. I also have enjoyed reading Ellen's article and agree with some of the comments coming in the chat. You know, that it's a bit of an underutilized area and more funding is needed. Thanks for sharing your research. That's great.
Thank you.
I'd also like to thank Kyla, Glenn, Samantha, Amy and Kerry for presenting today, and everyone who's popped questions or comments in the chat and engaged with the presentations. While that does officially wrap up the presentation element for this year's seminar, we will have a more informal discussion session tomorrow morning. Unlike the seminar so far, it won't be recorded. It will just be a 90 minutes kind of discussion time that gives you an opportunity to talk more about some of the ideas and topics that have been raised across the last 2 days and connect with some of our colleagues from across Australia and even New Zealand. I did see someone joining us in the chat from New Zealand this morning. So you can still register for that on the wiki page. For our friends under Australian Western Standard Time, it will start at 9 a.m. Those joining us from Australian Central Standard Time, it will be 10:30 a.m. And the rest of us on Australian Eastern Standard Time, it will be 11 a.m. For this session, it would help to have a webcam and microphone. We'll be going into some breakout rooms and smaller groups. So yes, Nicole said last year this debrief was very valuable. We really encourage you to join if you can. Like, some of the great conversation and discussion can happen in some of these more informal chats. So you'll also receive a link to an evaluation survey, which we encourage you to complete and return. As Ellen mentioned yesterday, this seminar has come together thanks to representatives from and speakers from across Australia, as well as our friends from Denver. So it's really helpful for our planning to know what's of value to you and how we can make the best use of this unique opportunity to connect with our colleagues in local studies. I would also like to thank Ellen especially, who has really championed this seminar and brought us all together. And unless you have anything else to add, Ellen, I might wrap up and thank you all and hopefully see some of you tomorrow.